The Sky This Month with your host, Dave McDonald.
Welcome to The Sky This Month. I'm your host, Dave McDonald, and we have a special show for you. With Artemis mission getting ready to launch as early as February 6th, we're getting back flying into space with human beings. So you don't want to miss this interview with Scott Poteet, who was the pilot of the Polaris Dawn mission, and check this SpaceX video out and see what this mission was all about. Hope that you enjoyed that little video clip, that teaser. I'm going to be interviewing astronaut, pilot, Scott Poteet, as it took place at Stratham Hill Park when he returned for his homecoming from space. Exciting mission, breaking all kinds of records, and you're going to hear about that. I'm going to interview him in person right after we talk about the night sky. So, let's talk about the night sky. Well, this is what's going on in the night sky for the second half of January, beginning of February. I'm going to share with you about the winter hexagon. So we're going to learn some stars and some constellations. The view behind me shows what some of the constellation artwork might look like. And you can see right pretty much smack dab in the middle, this is the evening of January 30. And that only matters because of the moon. The moon is going to be hanging out right near Jupiter, so a great night, January 30th, to take a picture of the moon and Jupiter together in the constellation of Gemini, the twins. And you see these two stars representing the heads of the twins. Castor and Pollux are the heads of the twins. And then to the left is Cancer the crab, and then over down towards the right, as you're looking at the screen, is famed Orion. And then we have Taurus the bull with the eye of the bull, the star Aldebaran, and we're going to try to help you find these things easily in the night sky, because obviously you don't have this artwork hanging out in the night sky. So what you're going to see is good for a couple weeks before January 30th, a couple weeks after January 30th. The importance of January 30th is just that it's that night that the moon is going to be hanging out near Jupiter. And every night, the moon is going to move about 13 degrees towards the east. Okay, so let's take a look at the sky without the artwork. So here, nothing's changed except we got rid of the artwork. And so I'm going to show you this winter triangle. And winter hexagon. 6 sides. As you look south, this is about 9 o'clock at night, January 30th. But again, same a couple weeks before, a couple weeks after, it's all good. You find Orion, easy to find. You've got the 3 belt stars, Al-Natak, Al-Nalam, and Mintaka, and the star Rigel. We're going to start with Rigel to build our hexagon. The star Betelgeuse, which is a red star, is going to be in the middle-ish of our hexagon. So starting down at Rigel, the bottom right, it's a hot white blue star. We're going to move up to Aldebaran, and Aldebaran is the eye of the bull. It's an orange star, so it's hotter than Betelgeuse, Betelgeuse being a red star is the coolest. And then from Aldebaran, we're going to go up to overhead to a star named Capella. Capella rules the overhead for the winter sky. It's a yellow star, like our star, the sun, is yellow. So it's hotter still than Aldebaran. And then we're going to come back down, kind of making a left turn as we look at the sky, to the twin stars, Castor and Pollux. And if you remember the twin names, Castor and Pollux, well, which one's which? Well, Castor has an R in it. It's the one on the right. Pollux has an L in it. It's the one on the left. Pretty clever, eh? And then we're going to keep coming down to make our hexagon to a star called Procyon, which is the little dog star, and continue down to Sirius, which is the big dog star, and it's the brightest star in either hemisphere, either northern or southern hemisphere is Sirius. And then we connect from Sirius back over to Rigel, and there's our winter hexagon with some constellations thrown in. So next slide, we're just going to connect the dots to make it a little easier to kind of visualize what's up there. Orion and his belt, Betelgeuse kind of in the middle-ish of the hexagon, starting with Rigel, hot blue-white star, up to Aldebaran, the eye of the bull, then up to Capella overhead, yellow star, like our sun. Castor and Pollux, Castor the one on the right, and Pollux the one on the left. These are the heads of the twins. And then we come down to Procyon, the little dog star, finishing with Sirius, the brightest star in either hemisphere, negative 1.44 magnitude, and that's the big star, dog star, and complete the hexagon back over to Rigel. So there are some stars, some constellations for you to enjoy in the night sky. I'm your host, Dave McDonald, and don't forget to keep looking up. Now, I want to introduce to you myself, introducing to you Scott Kid Poteet and the amazing record-breaking mission, the Polaris Dawn mission, as Scott comes back and is welcomed home in his town of Stratham, New Hampshire. Enjoy this interview. May I call you Scott?
You can.
I can. All right, Scott. So in this day and age, we read about so many things are for some hype or, grandeur or fluff. But this Polaris Dawn mission really had some essence to it. It really had some meat to it, a purpose behind it. Can you tell us a little bit about the purpose of the Polaris Dawn mission?
Yeah, you bet. First off, thank you everyone for coming out. This is truly special, not only for myself but my family. This is family to us. This is our community, and it has a true impact on our lives, and we're just blessed to have all the family and friends that we do in this community. So thank you for coming out and supporting this and welcoming me home. It's I mentioned it on the Chronicle the other night. It's when we arrived after splashdown, it was like 1 a.m, long flights, tired. And at the police station, they had the kiosk up and it said, "Welcome home, Scott Kid Poteet." And it's like, we'd only been here since March. We just moved, or May. We just moved back from Colorado after spending a couple of years there. A lot of work was based out of LA at the SpaceX headquarters. And it just minimized the travel to and from, but we knew this was our home and we wanted to get back here. So having that moment of coming home to you guys was really special for us, and we're just glad to be back. This was the first all-civilian mission to space. Up to this point, it's kind of a new chapter in space exploration. NASA started off 50s and 60s with Mercury, Gemini, Apollo, and then transitioned into the shuttle program. And then once that ended, it kind of handed the reins over to the commercial organizations. And right now, leading the way is SpaceX, taking astronauts to and from the space station. We did this program, and we wanted to prove that anyone could go to space while doing good things for here on Earth. So we partnered with St. Jude Children's Research Hospital, and we had to come up with a unique way to select the crew. So we gave one seat to St. Jude. They selected Haley Arsenault. She's the first childhood survivor of cancer. When she was 10, now she's a PA at St. Jude. And she's the first astronaut to have a prosthesis to go to space. And she's the youngest American astronaut to ever go to space. And then we did a sweepstakes and contest for seats 3 and 4. And then over a very short 6 months, we taught them how to go space. And I was the mission director on that. And my big focus was raising awareness and funds for St. Jude through various events and fundraising events that ultimately led to about $250 million to benefit them. One of the challenges that we all face as a country to get back to the lunar surface and eventually Mars and beyond. And the first thing that came up was a spacewalk. So we needed to figure out how to develop a suit that will eventually be utilized by hundreds, thousands walking on the lunar surface and eventually Mars, and do it, in a responsible way that's cost effective versus, $1 billion program developing one suit that they currently use on the ISS. And then we started to come up with the Polaris Dawn mission, which is the first mission. And our 4 primary objectives for that mission was to do the first commercial spacewalk, which was going to be the first time that 4 astronauts were involved in a spacewalk. Right now, out of the station, it's typically 2 astronauts at a time. This is the first time that 4 astronauts were involved. We wanted to set an altitude record because, again, it's about pushing the envelope in space exploration. So we wanted to figure out how we could go higher and further and test the capabilities of this rocket, the Falcon 9 and the Dragon capsule. So we wanted to do an altitude record. And that was set by Gemini 11 back in 1966. Pete Conrad and Dick Gordon went up to 1,368 kilometers. We needed to push that and wanted to go to 1,400, which puts us in the lower portions of the Van Allen belt, just a higher radiation level. And again, it's a part of the figuring out what is the impact of radiation going to be on future missions, because that's something we need to solve, because if we're going to go to Moon, Mars, and beyond, we're going to have to transient these higher radiation levels. And then we also wanted to test Starlink. So Starlink laser-based communication, it's truly changing the way we communicate around the world. One of the big projects that we had was with St. Jude to kind of help foster their global initiative program, where they're trying to provide outreach to these remote locations around the world where they don't have the medical resources that bigger cities have, and they're hours, if not days, away from getting that medical care. So by providing these remote locations with Starlink terminals, they're able to communicate with St. Jude in these bigger cities and get the telemedicine they need, diagnosis, continued care that they otherwise would not have. So that was a big part of our initiative, was to test this in space for the very first time. And then lastly, it's all about the science and research. So we wanted to utilize our time wisely on orbit for the 5 days we were up there. So we identified 40 experiments, partnered with different nonprofits, universities, medical hospitals, that would identify, again, some of these challenges we face as humans to go on these longer duration missions, because there's a lot of things that happen to the body on orbit that we all experience, which was kind of wild. But these experiments address those concerns that we have, as well as some of the medical concerns we have on Earth that we can't test necessarily, because we have the option of testing them in a zero-G environment up in orbit. So that's a long answer to a short question.
Very thorough. You get an A+. I am a teacher, so my next question involves the teacher's favorite phrase, compare and contrast. So I understand you and your crew were together for 2.5 years of training. And so could you compare, contrast how the training may have been the same, differed from NASA to SpaceX training to reach all your recent achievements, your recent goals?
Yeah. So we've been training for about 2.5 years for this mission. Very similar model that we designed based on what NASA has done for decades. We focus a lot on the basics in the beginning, learning the systems of the spacecraft, the emergency procedures, getting comfortable in the capsule, as a crew. So that was a lot of our focus in the simulator. We do a lot of that training in SpaceX headquarters, which is in LA. We also do some supplemental training at Johnson Space Center in Houston, as well as Kennedy Space Center down in Florida where the launch was. So a lot of the training is in the headquarters, and it's focused on the procedures. There's also specific training that we had to accomplish that addressed the spacewalk, because this is the first time we were going to do it. We had to bring the entire capsule down to vacuum. So we had to figure out what the impact that was going to be to the capsule, to the hardware, to the software, and to the human body. And how we were going to coordinate that and orchestrate it in a very small, confined capsule. So that took a lot of training. And then lastly, we did a lot of practical type training events. This is more the experiential learning, which resonates with my background at UNH. Got a degree in outdoor education, where it's experiential education. You're given a basic skill set, and then you're just sent to the wolves, figure it out, and learn from those experiences, and then you come back and reflect on that. That involved a lot of mountain climbing, winter mountaineering, whitewater rafting in college, which was a lot of fun. So the application for space training was very similar. We climbed Cotopaxi down in Ecuador, Mount Rainier in Washington, and people ask, you're climbing a mountain, what does that have to do with space travel? Well, that was actually some of the most practical training that we accomplished, because you're put into a situation where you got to get comfortable that in an uncomfortable environment. You're on the side of a mountain, you're dehydrated, you're dealing with altitude issues, you're not eating very much, your sleep sucks. It's just very, very challenging. And that's how it was on orbit. You had to deal with the circumstances real time. There's no control alt delete. There's no reset button on orbit. You got to deal with the circumstances that you're dealt. And when it's uncomfortable, you got to get comfortable. So that's why we did some of the mountaineering. Scuba diving, similar. It's very good training for the buoyancy, the challenges with communication, flying fighter jets. Jared's a pilot, I'm a pilot. He's got a fleet of fighter jets that we utilize for training. Again, that's an opportunity for us to work on crew resource management, communication, checklist procedures, trust, flying inches apart from each other in fighter jets going 400 miles an hour. You got to be comfortable with the other person's skill set, I guess. So we did a lot of that practical training to get ready for this mission. Like I said, it was about 2.5 years.
You speak of launch, and you were, as you said, a fighter pilot, and you flew the Thunderbirds, and you've had a lot of experience going very fast and having to think very quickly and make very quick decisions and such. So now you're on the launch pad, about to go thousands of miles an hour, I guess up to 17,500 miles an hour on orbit. And so take us through the experience of sitting, anticipating the launch that happens, and then when you break free into the feeling of weightlessness.
Yeah, so there was a lot of buildup. You're in quarantine. The weeks leading up to the launch itself, just to minimize exposure to viruses, and just try to stay healthy, because if you get up on orbit and you can't clear your ears for the different pressurization changes, it's going to impact whether you do the spacewalk or not. So we spend a couple weeks isolated for in the lead up to the launch itself. There was delays along the way for weather. Because there's limitations on the capsule itself. If you have to splash down, it's the wave height, the winds, the weather. So there's a lot of delays that led up that extended that time period, that kind of gave us this emotional roller coaster, because you build up the excitement, you go into it, and you're ready for the police convoy to go to the launch, and all of a sudden it's canceled. And that cancellation, now you come back down, and you just do this over and over again each day. And that was very challenging emotionally, but eventually we got the opportunity to launch. The weather was good, the rocket was good, so we set up for the launch itself. You start about 3.5 hours prior to the launch to go through this scenario. It's very similar to what the NASA astronauts do. We say goodbye to our families, or see you later to the families.
See you later.
And then you head over to the hangar to get suited up. And then once we're suited up, we drive up in the Teslas to the rocket and get strapped in. And then they close the hatch, and it's just the crew. And so we're sitting in our seats for a couple hours before launch, and it's just going through the checklist procedures. We had some delays, so we had a chance to jump on Wi-Fi and text some people and our families just to say everything's okay. But then it gets down to the wire for the launch itself, and that is one of the biggest thrills I've ever experienced in my life. Flown fighters for 20 years, but nothing was intense as launching in a rocket. You know, the rocket's there, the countdown continues. You can hear, it's almost like the rocket becomes alive. There's a lot of hissing from the venting, and there's a lot of swaying because there's a brace that releases from the rocket itself because you're going off the pad and nothing can be holding you back. And the rocket starts swaying and you can feel this sway happening. And then the countdown continues, and all of a sudden these rumbling starts, and you start lifting off and you start accelerating. And you quickly accelerate up to 17,500 miles an hour. That's orbital velocity to stay in orbit, and you build up your G-forces. So what we experience in a fighter jet, it's different axes. So it's this way in a fighter jet, and you pull up to about 9 Gs, but it's an energy depleting vehicle, so you only sustain those for a couple of seconds. In a rocket, they orient the seat on your back, so it's through the chest, and it's about 4.5 Gs that you experience, but it's longer duration because that rocket is producing 1.7 million pounds of thrust, which is 70 times a fighter jet. And you're going to feel it for a long time. And you go through these different G transitions. You go from 4.5, the first booster separates, you get thrown forward in your seat, you're floating for a couple seconds. The second stage light, you get thrown back in your seat. And then you build back up to 4.5 Gs. And then you're along this ride for about 6.5 minutes until you get to orbit. And that's when you separate from that second stage that's producing about 2.25 or 220,000 pounds of thrust. Again, about 10 F-16s. And then once you're on orbit, you separate, and now you're floating. And now it's eerily quiet, other than the buzz of the Dragon capsule from the fan, because the rocket's gone, and it's just you, the crew, and you're floating around. And there's an adaptation phase you kind of go through because you're in 0 G, and different things happen to the body. It's this fluid shifting that happens. So the CSF, the cerebral fluid that's in your spinal column, your brain, it's pulling down on gravity, what we're experiencing right now. It's settling, more or less. But up there, it kind of expands and floats around. This shift happens. They call it the space fog. They call it space adaptation syndrome. There's this correlation or cross-coupling effect that happens because of these G transitions. So there's either this translational rotation or this tilting. It's just very disorienting once you're on orbit, and it takes a while to get adjusted. We're not built for space. But the human body is very adaptive, so it gets used to that, those impacts. I am prone to motion sickness. That was one of my big concerns. I had to overcome it flying fighter jets. I still, to this day, back of an Uber, I'm done. I can't. That's why I never let my wife drive. I have to drive. But up there, I had no issues with motion sickness. So there's no correlation. That's something we studied up there, because those who get it didn't get it up. You know, it's just weird, and we don't know much about it. But yeah, we're on orbit for 5 days at that point, just floating around and trying to get adapted to the new environment. And then you got the downhill, which is a totally different ballgame.
Well, you are titled as and were the mission pilot. And what were your responsibilities as the mission pilot? What did you enjoy about it? What did you find most challenging about being the mission pilot?
Challenges. There was a lot of challenges. Just operating in a very close environment with a crew of 4, very jam-packed schedule that we had with all the different science and research. And you got to adapt and overcome, because we had 50% are impacted by space adaptation syndrome, the whole sickness, disorientation. And 2 of our crew members were. So our set timeline that was packed had to be adjusted based on adapting to those challenges that we faced. But right off the bat, we were right into our science and research. We did 40 different experiments. A lot of it had to do with that fluid shifting. It impacts your vision, the shape of your eyeball, the shape of the globe gets flattened, so it impacts your vision. Cognition is impacted, so you got to figure out a lot of that. So I think one of my most entertaining experiments was the endoscopy assessment of an airway. So I had to stick a camera down my nose and take images of my airway, because what we're doing there is there's future concerns of doing triage on orbit with longer duration missions. Right. Something's going to happen to somebody on orbit where you're going to have to, assess an airway or incubate. So that was one of my tasks, was to stick a camera down my nose and take pictures. So all those experiments, it was just constant, and there wasn't much time for sleep. There was a little bit of piloting that we did on day 4, but otherwise it's a very autonomous system. Mission control is more or less piloting that vehicle a majority of the time, and you're along for the ride, especially on the uphill and the downhill. The downhill physically was probably the most demanding, because it's a one-way trip, and as soon as you hit that atmosphere, you're going almost 18,000 miles an hour, and you're hitting the atmosphere, and you turn into a fireball. Initially it's this pink hue that builds up over the windows, which turns into these like sparkles, and then all of a sudden it's flames, and you're just more or less on fire with this plasma, and encapsulating the capsule for a good solid 6-8 minutes, and you're on fire, and you're on one way down, and then eventually you slow down enough where you can deploy the drag chute and parachutes and splash down. But those G-forces, after being deconditioned for 5 days, the 4.5 Gs feels more like 5.5, 6.5, and you're having to sustain them for that 6 to 8 minutes on the way down. Very difficult to breathe because of the strain that's put on the throat. But then you splash down, and we have the opportunity to reunite with the families, which was pretty special for us.
That's awesome. And my last question, I think, is, so being a family man, having a wife, having kids, being a human being, a career, just reflect as a human being what the experience was all about, what you took in through the eye gate, the ear gate, your feelings. Just what was it like as a human being for you, Scott?
The first thing that really comes to mind is how insignificant I felt looking down at Earth. And it's, we saw it at different altitudes. We set the altitude record at 1,408 kilometers. The world looks very, very small. I feel very insignificant at that altitude, just because you see land masses, you see weather patterns, you see a very large sphere. There's no borders, there's no cultivation. You can't make out any of the geographical features. All you see is landmass, weather patterns, and water. And I felt so insignificant at this blip in time in the history of mankind. And there's 8 billion people down on that planet. And I have this glorious view that I want everyone to be able to experience, because the Earth just has this glow to it. It's really hard to describe. It's not your natural sunlight that we see every day. It's just this powerful glow, and we got to see it from sunrise to sunset every 106 minutes based on our orbital altitude. And then the closer, so the apogee, the furthest we were away was that 1,400 kilometers. And then on the backside of the orbit is called the perigee. The lowest we passed was 190 kilometers, so really close, where you could make out cultivated land and geographical features and contrails from airliners, a lot more details, a lot flatter horizon. Not flat. The Earth is not flat. It's still curved, but it's just more broad at that lower altitude.
Thank you for that.
So, it just puts life in perspective. At this point, the small stuff I don't really stress about, just because I felt so insignificant up there. And the other thing is like the weather. Like, you see all these weather patterns and cloud formations and the glow from the earth. You just want to experience the smells and the winds and the seasons and the temperature deviations, where up there you're in a very controlled environment. It's a tin can. You can't smell anything. You're limited to that volume, and you see it and you want everyone to enjoy this view, but you can't experience it at that moment, and you just want to get back and experience it. And so I was certainly craving, once we got out of that capsule, the sea salt air, getting on the deck of the recovery ship. So that was definitely impactful to me.
Well, Scott, we could go on, and I personally am very interested in the topic.
Everyone must be freezing.
Well, I think your talk kind of warmed everybody up. So again, thank you so much for sharing this time with us here and with the Sky this month.
Hope you enjoyed that interview with astronaut Scott "Kid" Poteet. Great guy, great family. I enjoyed chatting with him. And again, I wanted to share some things that, even though this was a year ago, a little plus, we're getting back into space with people. The Artemis mission planned to start as early as, no sooner than, February 6, 2026. So I thought that interview with Scott "Kid" Poteet, with all the things that he mentioned that are first and exciting things about people getting back into space, would be awesome. So I hope you enjoyed that, and I hope you enjoyed the show. Dave McDonald for the Sky this month. And again, don't forget, keep looking up.